Hello, welcome everyone. Delighted that you could join us today in person in this rainy Vancouver day, and for everyone who will be joining us via live stream as well. My name is Am Johal. I'm an associate with the Institute for the Humanities and research associate with the Community Engaged Research Initiative to talk today on the No More Loopholes Act, cleaning up the Canadian arms trade. I want to acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We're honored and grateful for the leadership, stewardship, and truth-telling of Indigenous peoples here and across Turtle Island. Thank you so much for being here for this important conversation, particularly as it relates to how domestic and international law must also reckon with Canada's own colonial histories. This event is presented by SFU Center for Comparative Muslim Studies. I want to particularly thank Director Adel Iskandar and also Khaled, who's done a lot of the work in helping to promote and get this event together. Also want to acknowledge Ashley Smith, who's a student from UBC, student of Michael Byers, who is studying the Arms Trade Treaty, who helped get the word out to students at UBC. So thank you so much for being here in person. Canada likes to present itself on the world stage as a defender of human rights, international law, and multilateralism. We speak the language of peacekeeping, humanitarianism, and rules-based order, yet our actions, particularly when it comes to the arms trade, tell a very different story. In 2019, Canada signed on to the Arms Trade Treaty, committing itself to ensure that Canadian weapons are not used to facilitate war crimes, crimes against humanity, or serious human rights violations. And yet, through a deliberate loophole, arms exports to the US are exempted, fully aware that those weapons are routinely re-exported to conflict zones. So Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act, introduced by MP Jenny Kwan, matters a lot. It's a modest but critical step toward aligning Canada's actions with its commitments, closing a loophole that's allowed Canada to claim innocence while profiting from violence. We have a group of expert speakers here with us today. Of course, Jenny is here in person. Adel is here in person. On Zoom, we have Alex Neve, former Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada, 2025 Massey lecturer, and the author of Universal: Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World. Rachel Small with World Without War and the Arms Embargo Now Coalition, and Khaled Al-Qazzaz, Executive Director of the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council. We're going to start with each of the speakers talking for about 10 minutes each. I'll start with a round of questions to them, then we'll open it up for any questions that you have. I've circulated a myths and facts sheet. We'll make sure if you haven't received it that you get it. I'll also be circulating a sign-up sheet where you can get updates on this campaign, because it's going to be read at second reading later in February and voted on in March. And so the urgency of organizing in your communities is absolutely essential. It's wonderful to have a sitting MP with us in person. Jenny's a former city councillor, former community organizer, provincial cabinet minister, somebody who I've worked with for a long time in different capacities as well. So please join me in welcoming Jenny.
Thank you very much, Am. And I also want to just extend my thank you to the folks who organize this important conversation. And for being here on a Friday afternoon, no less. I know it's pouring rain out there, but still, it's a Friday afternoon. And I'm very honored to be joined by the panelists, all the people who are really experts in the field on this issue. And they are tireless advocates, and for not just on this issue, but for social justice, for human rights. We're living through a moment in history where the idea of accountability between states is rapidly unraveling. And Canada is not standing outside this collapse. We are actually implicated in it. Despite acceding to the Arms Trade Treaty in 2019, Canada is failing to meet its most basic responsibilities under international law. And the most glaring failure is the blanket exemption of arms exports to the United States. Bill C-233 was tabled in September to close this loophole once and for all. This is my private member's bill that is subject to a lottery system with all members of parliament after each election. After 10 years, I've waited. I finally got a lottery early enough where my private member's bill will actually be debated in the House of Commons. And I've made that decision to do it on this. And since the beginning of the second Trump administration, it has become increasingly difficult to speak of normal geopolitics. After the brazen acts of impunity represented by the genocide in Gaza or the US removal of the president of Venezuela, the old rules no longer even pretend to apply. The bullying of Greenland on Canada is no longer satire. We used to think in the beginning that was some sort of bad joke, but now it is part of a dystopian resurgence of imperial ambition and the end of the post-Second World War order. From Israel's genocide in Gaza and its unfolding annexation of the West Bank, to China openly eyeing Taiwan, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to the death of Iranian civilians, the pattern is unmistakable. Power is being exercised without restraint, and civilians are paying the price. International law, as a meaningful constraint on violence, is collapsing in real time. And there is, for some time now, in a hypocritical application of it, frankly, in the first place. There are many things I disagree with Prime Minister Mark Carney, but when he speaks about middle powers acting together on the basis of shared values, he is right. The problem, of course, is not the language in his speech. The problem is that Canada's actions do not match his words. Bill C-233 is the litmus test of whether the Carney government will follow its words with action. At Davos, Mark Carney spoke eloquently about responsibility, about rebuilding trust in institutions, about the danger of saying one thing and doing another. He cited Thucydides and Václav Havel. Impressive, right? He warned that credibility is lost when words are not matched by action, and that leadership in a fractured world requires moral consistency, not just economic calculation or geopolitical convenience. And he said, and I quote, "There is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety. It won't," end quote. Those words matter. But words don't stop bombs. Words don't save civilians. Words don't prevent Canadian weapons from ending up and be implicated in mass atrocities. Only legislation can do that. We will see soon enough how the Carney government will vote on Bill C-233. Prominent former Liberal foreign affairs ministers, such as Lloyd Axworthy and Alan Rock, are supporting this legislation. And a handful of current Liberal MPs are as well. But the larger question is, who else in the Liberal caucus will support this? Now, I'm not here to mock them, but I'm here to ask for their support. Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act, matters right now. This is not an abstract policy debate. It is a concrete test of whether Canada is prepared to align its foreign policy actions with values it claims to champion on the world stage at this critical moment of rupture. All eyes are on Canada, and Bill C-233 will come before the House of Commons for second reading in late February. It was introduced in September and has already been endorsed by many human rights organizations, nonpartisan peace groups, city councils across the country. The vote later on in early March is decisive. And if members of parliament do not support this bill at second reading, it will not go to committee. It will die on the floor. And this is the moment when Parliament's lofty rhetoric about human rights and international law either becomes real or it is exposed as hollow. From Gaza to Yemen to Sudan, civilians are paying the price for global arms system that privileges profit, strategic alliances, and plausible deniability over human life. Canadian-made weapons and components are directly implicated in these crimes. In Sudan, mass killings and ethnic cleansing continue with almost no accountability. In Yemen, a decade of war has produced a grave humanitarian disaster. In Gaza, genocide is unfolding in real time, alongside land seizures, de facto annexation, and the routine killing of Palestinians in the West Bank. In December, I was one of 6 Canadian MPs denied entry to the West Bank by Israel, along with many civil society organizations. There were 30 of us in that delegation. And why? Because witnessing the reality on the ground has become a threat to those who want impunity to continue. That's why. Arms bearing the markings of Canadian defense manufacturers have appeared in the hands of forces operating in Gaza, in Sudan, and Yemen. United Nations experts in human rights organizations have repeatedly warned that arms flows traced back to Canada are prolonging conflicts and enabling atrocities. And yet, Canadian officials continue to deny responsibility, engage in willful ignorance, simply look the other way, or put their head in the sand, hoping no one will notice. Well, how is that possible? Because denial is built into the system. In 2019, Canada signed the Arms Trade Treaty, committing itself to ensure that Canadian-made weapons would not aid or abet war crimes, genocide, or serious human rights abuses. The treaty requires permits, risk assessments, transparency, and accountability. But Canada carved out an exception for the United States. Under current law, military exports to the US are exempt from the rules that apply to every other country. About half of all Canadian defense exports go to the United States, and none of those exports undergo case-by-case review. There is no meaningful assessment of end use, no tracking of re-exports, no public reporting that you can really put your hand on, no accountability. And once Canadian components cross the border, Canada stops asking questions. This is not neutrality. This is not realism. This is not leadership. This is willful ignorance embedded in law. The consequences are entirely predictable. Canadian-made parts are folded into US weapon systems and re-exported to war zones where war crimes are being committed. Canada benefits economically while pretending it bears no responsibility. This is exactly the kind of hypocrisy that destroys public trust, and exactly the kind of gap between words and deeds that Prime Minister Mark Carney warned about in Davos. Bill C-233 was introduced to end this charade. The No More Loopholes Act would amend the Export and Import Permits Act so that arms export to the United States are treated the same as exports to any other country. That means permits, that means risk assessments, that means transparency, and that means accountability. It would finally bring Canada into compliance with treaty it has already signed and meet best practices that other countries have signed on to. So let us be absolutely clear about what this bill does not do. It does not ban arms export. It does not shut down factories. It does not eliminate jobs. It does not prevent Canada from sending artillery to the Ukraine. It simply requires the same oversight for US-bound exports that applies everywhere else, period. Claims to the contrary, circulated in a leaked Liberal briefing document, are just frankly, misleading. They are factually incorrect. And we expect more from government. I expected more from the government. But most NATO allies already apply export controls to all destinations, including the United States. So why can't Canada as well? Ending the US exemption would not isolate Canada. It would finally bring Canada in line with international best practices. Bill C-233 governs exports and not imports. And the Arms Trade Treaty does not allow countries to exempt their closest allies from human rights obligations. Canada's current system violates both the spirit and the letter of the Arms Trade Treaty, which brings us back to Mark Carney. Carney spoke about values-based leadership in a fractured world, about responsibility, about credibility, about moral clarity. Now there's a chance to give meaning to those words and act. Supporting Bill C-233 would be tangible and a tangible demonstration that those values are more than just talking points. It will show that Canada is prepared to accept responsibility for the real-world consequences of its arms exports. It will show that human rights are not conditional, apply selectively when it is easy and ignored when it is inconvenient. Parliament now faces a clear choice. It can maintain a broken system that allows Canadian-made weapons to flow into the world's worst conflicts without oversight. Or it can close the loophole, honor the Arms Trade Treaty, take a modest but meaningful step toward accountability in an increasingly belligerent and lawless world. The NDP will unanimously support this legislation. Conservatives will more likely unanimously oppose it. And that means the outcome rests squarely with Liberals and the Bloc. Here in British Columbia, public pressure on Liberal MPs right up until the vote in early March is essential to making them do the right thing. Without public demanding their support for this legislation, it simply won't happen. This is why grassroots mobilizing matters. Private members' bills only advance when people make it politically impossible for them to ignore. Liberal MPs who speak eloquently about human rights and Canadian values must now decide whether those words have substance or whether they are just performative. Preening on the international stage without following through is not acceptable. It means not living up to what the moment asks of this government. It would mean following through on the Prime Minister's own words if we take action. At a time when the global order feels untethered and unhinged, Bill C-233 offers something very specific, a chance to align Canada's deeds with its words. Prime Minister Mark Carney is right. Credibility is built through action. And the Prime Minister spoke supportively of the prohibition of the use of force except when consistent with the UN Charter and respect for human rights. It is time for the Prime Minister Mark Carney, to take down the sign. The question is simple. Will Canada close the loophole or continue to look away? The answer will be written in how MPs vote on Bill C-233. I need your support, I need your help to make it happen. Let's hope we can make this happen. Not for me, not for you, but for humanity. Thank you.
Jenny. Next, I'm gonna ask Adel to speak next. I just wanted to once again thank Adel and the wonderful work that the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies does in terms of being a public face for the university, connecting with communities, and particularly on the issue of the genocide in Gaza. This unit at the university has been absolutely essential. So please, a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Am. It would be impossible to follow what you just delivered, Jenny. I just wanted to express my personal, and I'm sure all of our incredible gratitude for the remarkable courage that you bring to this battle, because it is a battle. It's a battle for humanity and rekindling and reconnecting with what it means to be human in this contemporary moment. So it takes a tremendous amount of courage to not only illuminate what is otherwise to most of us incredibly opaque. We see the laws, we feel that these laws may not be enacted in a manner that best serves the interests of the collectives. But for most of us who are not in a position to, or at least not privy to what you're privy to, the fact that you have decided to call this out, or the fact that you yourself have been left in the dark around what it is that our government is doing is not only shocking, it is a wake-up call. If our own MPs cannot actually call out our government for what it does or does not do, and if there are loopholes that are basically opaque to our own elected officials, can you imagine what it's like for us as a populace to be left in the dark? So I wanted to acknowledge the courage that it takes to bring forth C-2233 and the illuminating discussions and provocations that you've pushed us to envision and think about today. I also want to note that these loopholes, while of course conceived in a circumstance that allows the United States to have access to unhindered and unfettered access, not only to resources here in Canada, but also to special privileges that are not afforded to any other country. And while, for the most part, we may have behaved as if the relationship between Canada and the United States is largely seamless, we are now dealing with an increasingly hostile United States. And so those privileges, if they were ever deserved at any point in history, they are certainly not a privilege that should be afforded at this particular juncture in time. I want to draw my comments or bring my comments to a discussion around the Palestine exception more specifically, because I feel as though this is an elephant in the room. In the same way that Jenny talked about the United States exception when it comes to arms trade, we are also dealing with a legal exception that has to do with Palestine. This conversation is accentuated and accented by the very fact that these loopholes exist to allow for the transport of arms to Israel that is committing a genocide that is both supported by and endorsed and fully funded by the United States. This is why this matters the most. And this is a systematic process of obfuscation and concealment. Look at the battery of laws that have been issued and deployed to address and challenge other acts, military acts that we consider and deem problematic, such as the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and the way in which those are enacted and executed in such a way to allow us to see the outcomes before our very eyes. Jenny, you've been actively involved as well in trying to bring Gazan and newcomers to Canada and provide them with the same privileges afforded to other communities that have bore the brunt of conflict and war in this incredibly disparaging way, whether it's Syrians or Ukrainians or others in recent memory, but also many other communities in the past. But even that is impossible. So it is very difficult for us to envision and visualize a circumstance where it is possible for us to challenge, let alone stop a genocide, a continuing genocide, if I may add. The fact that there is claims of a ceasefire is lost on anyone who follows what is happening in Gaza and Palestine on a regular basis. And so the fact that we cannot even stop the movement of arms produced in Canada to the genocide is an indication that these laws have been effectively defanged, specifically for Palestine. And this is the Palestine exception that many of us are familiar with in all walks of life, in our respective institution, in our circumstances. I am not privy to what happens at a national or federal level, not even at the provincial, not barely even at the municipal level. I hardly know what's happening in my own neighborhood. But I can tell you that within our own institution here at SFU, our faculty union was able to pass a divestment motion within our union on June 7th of 2024. We are now at the end of January of 2026. Absolutely no progress whatsoever has been made in trying to either impact or shift the university's investment by a hair. We haven't gotten a hair of progress. Not only that, but a petition was brought to the Supreme Court against our very motions. So not only are these laws or policies or even, ambitions or aspirations being challenged, they are seen as inherently problematic. And the same is true across the board. There's a lot of performative action and support that is a veneer. It is a window dressing. There are some folks here who've been actively involved in so many different campaigns, including the apartheid-free communities and pushing for municipalities, including the city of Burnaby, which voted unanimously in favor of not in any way contributing to support for apartheid in Palestine. However, despite that, we have not yet seen a single serious action that actualizes these policies and laws. So we're now arriving at this moment of incredible sort of rapture, right? Where the arms trade we are implicated in it in such a way that allows us to see the fruits of those actions on the ground. When children are being liquefied, where communities are being imploded, where entire communities and families and family lines are being eradicated, this is something that should call us into immediate action. And I have to say, quite frankly, one cannot fault the larger communities here in Canada. We have had, over the last 2 years, one of the largest and most sustained protest movement in the history of this country in support of Palestinian rights. The fact that it gets absolutely no press or little to no press is in and of itself a condemnation of our very information system and what we take dear or what we consider important. The fact that all of our public broadcasters as well, I don't expect very much from our private broadcasters, but when our public broadcasters fail us, their only true mantra is to serve public interest, and they have failed us. When they failed us on our public interest, when they fail us on Palestine, they fail us everywhere else. I don't know how long I've spoken, but I think I'm probably ready to wrap up. I want to say one last thing in the context of this whole sort of performance and defanged kind of policies and laws that have rendered much of what we expect our government to do just symbolism, where the recognition of a Palestinian state, unlike any other state that the Canadian government has relations with, has not translated into any diplomatic outreach of any real tangible form. What is this Palestinian state that we recognize on paper, but will do absolutely nothing on the ground to actualize? But I have to say that Palestine, while we call it an exception, it is not actually an exception. It is far more than that. It is what many, including Palestinian American legal scholar Noor Arakat, calls a boomerang. What we have done in Palestine is coming back to haunt us here. The arms loophole that we're talking about that has been destroying families and livelihoods in Palestine over the last two some years, if not more, actually much more. We just happened to notice it during the two years of the genocide, is also the loophole that allows us to contribute to what is happening in Minnesota today. This is coming back for us. I worry that one of those days we become the ones here in Canada who are at the other end of that gun barrel, using our own arms to kill ourselves. Keeping in mind that fundamentally, we are a microcosm of the world. So we are already not only killing Palestinians, but we are also killing our own humanity and our own integrity as a polity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adel. Next on Zoom, we have Alex Neve, former Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada, 2025 Massey lecturer and author of a new book, Universal Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World. Please welcome Alex.
Thank you so much, Am, and good. I'm going to say good evening because it's evening where I am. But good afternoon, dear friends, and thank you so much, Jenny, for your incredible leadership around this. Very much appreciated. I'm not joining you from what it sounds like maybe is mild, rainy Vancouver. I'm in unbelievably cold Ottawa, joining you from the unceded and unsurrendered lands and territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. For decades, it has been clear that one of the most disgraceful causes of devastating human rights violations in our world is the ease with which arms and weapons are sold globally and transferred across borders everywhere, and then used to commit genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and other serious human rights violations. Doubly disgraceful because it is so preventable and avoidable. It's as simple as this. Don't hand arms over to human rights violators. It was long remarked that the arms trade, arguably the world's deadliest commerce, was also one of the least regulated. Yet for many, many years, campaigns to bring binding rules to the arms trade faced an enormous uphill climb. The geopolitical interests involved and the massive economic and political clout of the military-industrial complex were such that convincing governments to stop providing arms, even to the world's worst human rights violators, had long proved impossible. Human rights violators, it turns out, are good for business in the arms trading world. Survivors, family members, and civil society groups, however, were unrelenting. The devastating human toll of all of those irresponsible arms transfers simply could not be ignored. I have seen and witnessed that firsthand in so many of the frontline research missions I've carried out in all corners of the world. I think of the many interviews I carried out in the Nuba Mountains in Sudan with survivors of indiscriminate aerial bombardment by the Sudanese Air Force, barrel bombs literally pushed and rolled out of the back of high-flying aircraft. One woman described what it was like to pick up the disembodied pieces of a beloved elderly neighbor who had not been able to reach the closest home-dug shelter before the bomb dropped. She spoke to me of how she gently gathered the woman's body parts on a woven mat, and then she began to weep as she told me that she has always been haunted by the fact that she might not have recovered her entire body. During one of those research trips, there had been a massive wave of attacks only days earlier, and we were able to retrieve the twisted fragments of the weapons used against thousands of civilians. I returned home with a suitcase full of those deadly souvenirs, which we turned over to experts to see if their provenance could be traced. Testing of the remnants we had gathered pointed to cluster bombs, artillery rockets, barrel bombs, high-caliber bullets, and other weapons originating in at least 8 different countries. None of the arms had been made locally. They had all been transferred in from elsewhere, and it was obscene to imagine how easy it had been to do so. We confirmed that one of those 8 countries was the United States. No surprise, of course, given that the US was responsible for half of the world's arm trade that particular year, roughly $40 billion worth at the time. And I remember wondering at the time, and still do, as I sifted through those bits of metal that had caused such carnage and immense suffering, were any Canadian parts or components in the mix? Had I handled some piece of metal that began its journey here? Well, that was 10 years ago. More recently, in 2024, US global arms exports are now at a staggering Inconceivable $318 billion a year. Just sit with that figure for a minute. It's worth noting that is more than the GDP of 75% of the world's countries. Just keep that figure in mind as we consider how much attention we should be giving to arms trade that goes south of the border for us. Now, naysayers doubted that governments would ever agree to rein in the global arms trade. But people power was ultimately invincible. And in 2013, the United Nations adopted the Arms Trade Treaty. 13 years later, 117 countries, that's 60% of the world's nations, are now parties to it. Canada was not exactly an early adopter, far from it. Our country, which of course had once led the world in the drive to conclude a treaty to ban landmines 15 years earlier, was the 104th country to finally get on board this time. But we did so and have been bound by the treaty since 2019. We may have been slow to get there, but the resulting obligation is crystal clear. And it's this. This is almost word for word from the treaty. If there is an overriding risk that the arms export in question would be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law or a serious violation of international human rights law, the exporting state party, Canada, shall not authorize the export. All good so far. Except, as has been noted, while proudly announcing that we were now a party to this important treaty and would do our part in curtailing this deadly commerce, we quietly left open a glaring, sizable exception that undermined all of those words, an exception large enough to drive an armored vehicle through. Arms and weapons sold to the United States would not be covered, the so-called U.S. loophole. And let's be clear, what is at stake is significant. Well over $1 billion worth of weaponry, much of it parts and components, ranging perhaps in the range of 1/2 of Canada's overall global arms sales in any given year, are to the United States. This is not trivial. The companies making those sales don't even need to apply for a permit, let alone have the sales scrutinized for compliance with the Arms Trade Treaty. We have no eyeballs on what comes of those weapons. How are they used in the United States? By whom? Or to whom are they further sold or transferred? Perhaps directly, or perhaps after being incorporated into a missile or fighter jet or a weapon system. And what becomes of them in that third country? Who are they used against? None of this is theoretical. U.S. military strikes in Venezuela, the shocking violence being committed by ICE, and Israel's bombardment and genocide in Gaza are all supported by weapon systems, parts and components, and military technology originating in Canada. Consider Israel. While the Canadian government did, after a considerable amount of pressure, suspend direct military export permits to Israel, acknowledging that such weapons could be used in serious violations of international law, it has simultaneously refused to address the massive flow of Canadian-made components sent to the United States and then subsequently transferred to Israel. This includes, for example, Canadian explosive manufactured at General Dynamics facilities in Quebec and shipped to U.S. ammunition plants, producing 2,000-pound bombs, artillery shells, and tank rounds for Israeli forces. The illegal U.S. attack on Venezuela earlier this month relied on F-35 fighter jets, each containing millions of dollars worth of Canadian-made components from landing gear to engine parts. And when the U.S. military unlawfully bombed so-called narco-terrorist fishing boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, on at least one occasion coming back for round 2 to ensure there were no survivors, they used advanced MX series sensors manufactured by L3 Harris Westcam in Hamilton. Meanwhile, Brampton-based weapons company Rochelle has been contracted to send a rush order of armored vehicles to ICE, which, as we all know, is growing more brazen by the day in its campaign of detentions, deportations, and killings. In fact, one of Rochelle's armored vehicles was even caught on camera at the scene of the deadly attack in Minneapolis last Saturday. All of this is surely, truly a betrayal of the promise, and frankly, it is a clear violation of our obligations. How can our government credibly say to Canadians that they are comfortable with an arms control process that refuses to sell weapons directly to a human rights violator, but we are okay with making the sale to someone else who then closes the deal? Direct or indirect, no Canadian-made arms should make it through. It is no excuse to a blatant failure to ensure all of our arms exports are scrutinized to say, but it is different with the United States. We're so closely integrated. We trust them, though they are, of course, not party to the Arms Trade Treaty. We have many years and decades of doing business together. We have become accustomed to our border being open. Oh, it will be so complicated to disentangle. None of that justifies an arms transfer that leads to serious violations of international, humanitarian, or human rights law. And that is why Bill C-233, the No More Loopholes Act, matters so very much. It would tighten up our arms export processes and finally require US-bound arms to be regulated the same way. We're not asking for something different, just regulated the same way as all other Canadian military exports, subjecting them to the same transparency requirements and to the same human rights risk assessments. It deserves to be supported. It must be supported by every member of Parliament every time it comes up for vote. It is what international legal obligations require of us, and it is simply what humanity requires of us. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alex. Next, there's a number of NGOs across the country that have been running a campaign. Next up, we have Rachel Small from World Without War. It's part of the Arms Embargo Now coalition, which has been working for the past 6 months on a larger campaign. Please welcome Rachel.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who has spoken so powerfully and incredibly and from the heart tonight. It's an honor to be here with you, and I'm glad I was able to join by Zoom as much as I'd love to be there in Vancouver. As mentioned, my name is Rachel. I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War. We're a global grassroots network advocating for the abolition of war, and we work with chapters and members and affiliates all over the world to debunk the myths of war and to take concrete steps to build an alternative world, the world that we need. So, and as mentioned, I also coordinate the Arms Embargo Now campaign, which I'm always thrilled to talk about, but especially in the context of our discussion tonight. I kind of want to repeat some of the things that have been named just because I mean, these first few weeks of 2026, it's been a lot, and they've been just remarkably marked by violence. And I have been, as Alex just mentioned, like really so struck by how much of this violence has in fact relied on Canadian-made weapons to take place. Of course, the year started with the US's just enormous escalation of what I would call global warmongering, notably, of course, the attack on Venezuela, and as Alex mentioned, that relied on Canadian sensors made by L3 Harris that relied on millions of dollars of Canadian parts in every single one of those F-35s that the U.S. military has encircled Caracas with and used in its attacks. And just this past Saturday, I was at a birthday party with my kids when I got a text from a fellow Arms Embargo Now researcher saying, "Look at this live video from Minneapolis. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" And what I saw on that live footage was Rochelle armored vehicles that we've been tracking that are made The company's headquartered in Brampton, Ontario. That's where a majority of their production takes place. We knew there had been a contract that had been allowed to go through to sell these Canadian armored vehicles to ICE, and here they were on the scene this past Saturday morning, caught on live video, the morning that a nurse was murdered by ICE in broad daylight. And I should say part of why we've been monitoring that company is that they had been desperately trying over the previous 2 years to sell those same armored vehicles to the IDF, to the Israeli military. So yeah, the US loophole is what makes a lot of this possible, right? The fact that there's no regulation, tracking, monitoring, no permits needed for all of these arms exports to the US, which is billions upon billions of dollars, over 60% of Canada's arms exports. We don't know how much exactly because they are not tracked. There's no transparency. Additional examples that we and others have been looking into. Some of you may have caught the news coverage a few months ago that demonstrated that Sudanese fighters accused of massacres, like the Rapid Support Forces, RSF fighters, were caught using Canadian-made rifles that literally had the logo of a BC manufacturer, Sterling Cross, on them. When CBC revealed these photos, Minister Anand said these will be investigated. I followed up many times. There has not been a word since. And frankly, I've heard that many times, notably for years about Canadian weapons being used, for example, in Yemen. This will be investigated. I don't know how those BC rifles made it to the RSF in Sudan, but notably, neither does Minister Anand, neither does Global Affairs Canada. And that's just one more of many, many signs that we could add to a list that our current arms export system is broken. We're talking about Canadian weapons being used in the worst war crimes on the planet. And of course, as has been mentioned, despite the supposed ceasefire, the bombs are still falling on Gaza. We know these rely on ongoing shipments that contain vital components of both Israel's key fighter jets and the bombs they are dropping. We know there are Canadian-made explosives, TNT, that arrived at a Quebec port, traveled through Canada to the US's biggest bomb factories to end up in those bombs that are falling on Gaza this week. This is what's at stake, and this is why this discussion and this bill is so important. And of course, for over 2 years now, I wouldn't even know how to count the number of tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people, possibly more across this country who have risen up, who have taken action against Israel's genocide. As has been mentioned, we've seen some of the largest anti-war demonstrations in Canadian history. And people have been incredibly creative, have done literally everything they can to call attention to advocate, to demand an end for Canadian complicity specifically in Israel's horrific violence. And a concrete and urgent demand has resounded for the Canadian government to impose a comprehensive two-way arms embargo on Israel. This is something very clearly understood by the Canadian government. It's on the GACA website, on the Global Affairs Canada website, on the sanctions section, right there it says this is what an arms embargo is. They've imposed it on other countries. It's very possible. And for over 2 years, we've been growing our ranks from coast to coast to coast to demand it. And over a year ago, we came together, as Am mentioned, to create the Arms Embargo Now campaign and coalition, which at this point is an alliance of nearly 500 endorsing organizations across the country. It represents millions upon millions of Canadians, including the country's largest unions, most recently Unifor joined, faith institutions, human rights and advocacy groups, Palestinian-led organizations, like really every type of group that you can imagine. And in the past 6 months, one of our focuses has been to release reports because so much of the need for an arms embargo is in information that has been withheld, that has been hidden, that has been, frankly, hard to access. The weapons companies themselves are incredibly secretive, and unfortunately, so has the Canadian government been very secretive about Canada's role in arming Israel's attacks. So in July, we released a report that gave just a very detailed public snapshot of what do these arms exports look, in that case, going directly from Canada to Israel. We combed through shipping records, Israeli tax data, And it really showed this unending pipeline of military goods from Canada to Israel. It showed how deeply Canadian military products are embedded in Israel's military infrastructure. And it showed, shockingly, that many of these exports are happening literally on commercial flights under people's seats in the cargo hold. It turns out our weapons parts bound from Canada to Israel. But what we realized in researching this report is that even this large flow of weapons completely paled in comparison to the much, much, much larger flow of Canadian weapons that were getting to Israel, not being directly exported, but indirectly via the US. And this is the context, of course, we're talking about tonight with the US loophole. So we realized, okay, we have to put out a second report. So in November, we did, and what we found were hundreds of shipments, notably including what Alex mentioned, for example, Canadian explosives and flammable materials, largely made by General Dynamics in Quebec. They were never listed in any way as being exported to Israel, because where they were listed, well, first of all, they're not super tracked, and they're not really listed much of anywhere, but where they were, the theory going, was just to these US bomb factories, some of the biggest bomb factories in the world. But of course, those factories, they were making the 2,000-pound bombs. They're still making the 2,000-pound bombs, the 155-millimeter shells, the tank rounds for Israel. We also tracked 433 shipments of TNT, like the literal pure explosive material, that turns out are made in Poland. They all go through Port Saguenay in Quebec en route to, again, these US bomb plants that are producing largely those 2,000-pound bombs that turn refugee camps into craters. We didn't know before, and to my knowledge, no one had really talked about the fact that Canada was allowing our ports, our highways, our airlines to be this pipeline, this conduit of weapons, not only made in Canada, but from other parts of the world as well, to the US en route to Israel. I won't go on with kind of the research details, but basically, in short, what we felt as we continued to watch this like live stream genocide was this incredible feeling of horror that while these Palestinian families were burying their children under the rubble of Canadian armed airstrikes, Canadian ports, airlines, highways had been turned into covert military transport service, essentially, being used to literally ship explosives to the factories that were producing Israel's main weapons of war. All the while, we had all been told that Canada had stopped all arms exports to Israel. It was see no evil, hear no evil. We're just not paying attention to anything that's flowing to the US, regardless of where it ends up. So this is the context in which the Arms Embargo Now campaign has been so happy to support Bill C-233, because I won't go into these again because it's been so well explained. But yeah, because if passed, this bill will really help ensure that weapons that go through the US don't disappear into a regulatory black hole. That Canada is really accountable for where these weapons are being exported, and it adds transparency in other aspects as well, and really makes it clear that any complicity in war crimes is unacceptable, and we cannot be involved in arming them. I was on an Arms Embargo Now movement call last week with 500 people, where we really talked in depth. It was an organizing call, so we really talked about the opportunities and the challenges of advocating for this bill. And I think today we've talked quite a bit about what is the incredible opportunities that this bill presents. But in terms of the challenges, I guess I do want to name something about this political moment, because I mean, we've talked about the violence of the US, of Israel in the past few months, and of course for much longer. But this moment in Canada is deeply striking to me, especially someone who works at an anti-war organization. I read through I can't remember how many 100 pages of Budget 2025, but it's a war budget, right? This is a commitment from Canada to triple Canada's military budget, especially with the massive escalation of military hardware. We're talking about spending 8 times more than we do on housing, 6 times more than we do on any other infrastructure. And to me, when I look at this historic war spending, the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II, to me, this is a promise of a war-filled future. This is a promise of a foreign policy for Canada that's based on ever-increasing militarization and warmongering in lockstep with the US. The military hardware Canada's promising to buy is overwhelmingly US equipment. It's overwhelmingly fighter jets and warships and drones and the Golden Dome weapons in space that literally cannot operate without Canadian military cooperation with the US. I don't see this about keeping us safe. And frankly, just like when you build pipelines, you're entrenching a future of oil extraction, of climate crisis. You're not building a pipeline just in case maybe you won't use it. Similarly, when I see the decisions Canada's making now to ramp up the military budget to shocking levels, to purchase these new warships, fighter jets, space missiles, to me, that's seen Canada entrenching a commitment to wage war with these weapon systems for decades. From my perspective, militarism is not the answer to the problems that we face. And frankly, the last thing that we need is for the weapons Canada is exporting or buying or using to be fueling Trump's increasingly unhinged warmongering. I don't see that as the path forward for Canada. And this historic ramp up of Canadian militarism is, of course, the new context in which this organizing from grassroots organizing across the country to change Canadian law, to advocate for the No More Loopholes rule. It's happening in the context of this much broader picture of Canadian militarization as well. So it's been an uphill battle from the grassroots activists. I'm reporting back on the ground all across the country. We're in touch with many thousands of people who've been advocating for this bill for many months, and I think maybe some of those people are in the room here today. And it's an uphill battle right now, and that, I think, is what makes this type of advocacy even more important, because as the Liberal government is prioritizing militarization above all else, it's ever more important for us to say this is not the way. And the bare minimum, frankly, is to be regulating our arms exports, is to have human rights protections in place. That's the minimum. That's not a radical ask. That's not the maximum. That's the bare minimum. Specifically, I want to say for those who do want to take action with the Arms Embargo Now campaign towards this bill, we have put out a ton of materials in the past few weeks at armsembargonow.ca, right at the homepage, or you could go to armsembargonow.ca/no more loopholes. We just put up an MP tracker, so you can put in your postal code and it'll tell you, is your MP planning on voting for this bill? Have they told us yet? Maybe they haven't told us yet. And there's a button there where you can send them an email to tell them what you think about this bill. If on the tracker it says your MP is planning on voting for this bill, if you click to send them an email, it'll send them a thank you email. So you should do it no matter who your MP is. If your MP is Jenny Kwan, you should send her a thank you email as well. Similarly, we've announced a day of action for February 17th, which we think is the week before this bill is likely to come to vote, though others in the room would know the timeline perhaps with more detail than me. But on that day, people from coast to coast to coast are going to be gathering and, frankly, asking their MPs to pick a side. Is their member of parliament going to keep arming genocide, war, flagrant state violence, or are they going to stand for human rights? Are they going to stand for international law? Are they going to break rank with Trump's war machine? Are they going to close the US loophole? So I hope that folks listening tonight will join us in making this choice unignorable and undeniable and taking action in this way. And I also want to acknowledge that there are so many other ways that people have been advocating for an end to this violence, advocating for an end to the flow of Canadian arms to violence all over the world. And deep appreciation for the ways that everyone here on this call speaking, and I suspect in the audience as well, has been showing up.
So much. Rachel, before I ask Khaled Al-Qazzaz, from Executive Director of the Canadian Muslim Public Affairs Council, to speak, I just want to recognize a couple of people who represent the organization locally who've been getting in the ears of the MPs, Ahmed and Akram, who are here. So thank you so much for your activity. Khaled, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, And I'm really honored and privileged to be among many active individuals and actually people who've given me hope in many different times of my life and particularly in these difficult moments when you see people like Alex and Rachel in their different capacities advocating for the right things and standing for what everybody should be standing for, actually gives me so much hope. And then when we see MP Kwan taking these bold moves in Parliament and basically putting the government to test into their, she said that the litmus test for their credibility and for their ability to stand for human rights, I think it is actually hopeful. And the fact that we have many among us across the country able to say these things, I think we have a lot to accomplish, and we can do more. We just need to be consistent, and we need to follow through what everybody has said today. I'm not going to add too much. I'm just going to bring in a couple of other perspectives to this conversation. I thank Dr. Iskandar for hosting us and the great work they do at the center as well. So I'll start with the students' perspective, because really, truly, they inspired us to continue and inspired us that change is possible. So across the world and here on our campuses, students have been at the forefront of the anti-war movement of our generation. And at SFU particularly, we witnessed students standing in solidarity with the encampment at UBC and speaking out clearly against the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. The student movement has done more than just protest. It has created a rupture. It forced institutions to confront the so-called world order that depends on their complicity in violence and genocide. Students, through encampments, demands for divestment and solidarity, disrupted business as usual and made it impossible to look away. The movement for justice in Palestine is stronger because of the student movement, their organizing, and their willingness to take risks. Big shout outs to the student movement. A few weeks back at the World Economic Forum, Prime Minister Carney spoke about a global rupture. He acknowledged that the old world order is not coming back and urged countries to rely on their values to guide what comes next. That framing matters because moments of rupture demand choices that are rooted in values and international law. But Prime Minister Carney cannot invoke this language without acting accordingly. To lead with values, this commitment must be reflected in real material action and must begin with the closing of the US loophole and ending the flow of weapons to Israel. Every year, Canada exports over $1 billion worth of military goods to the United States, most of it without permits, regulation, or tracking of the final destination. This long-standing loophole has allowed Canadian weapons and components to reach conflict zones, including Israel, indirectly and without oversight. This legislation would close a critical gap in Canada's export control framework. It would strengthen transparency, oversight, and risk assessment, and it would make it far harder for Canada to claim ignorance about how weapons are being used. If Canada wants to meet this obligation under the Arms Treaty, the Genocide Convention, and the Rome Statute, this legislation is essential. Accountability cannot end with a ceasefire. It has to be demonstrated through meaningful policy change. While we're here today to discuss Bill C-233 and the arms embargo, we also need to pay attention to some parallel legislation that this government is trying to push through, like Bill C-9, the so-called Combating Hate Act. This bill is being proposed to further silence movements for Palestine and criminalize dissent. These efforts are not disconnected. They're part of a broader attempt to suppress accountability and the movement against ongoing genocide. This is something we all need to pay very close attention to and advocate against consistently. Politically speaking, following the public statements made by the Khan government around Bill C-233 or similar, should be legislations that the government should introduce themselves. Or supported closely by the Liberal Party. Ministers Jolie and then Anand confirmed in many ways that the government does not intend to supply weapons to Israel as the genocide was unfolding. However, it was actually supplied through this loophole and other means. And therefore, through the works of the Arms Embargo Now Coalition and people like Rachel, and organizations and many organizations, it exposed the loophole that made Canada complicit in the genocide, which results in a moral and a legal responsibility to end this complicity and close the loophole. It is also a more imperative to take into account those who were responsible for this complicity. And moreover, there is, even with the announced ceasefire, the Israelis continue their aggression. And over 488 people were killed, 1,350 were injured, which means that this calamity has not ended, and that our weapons are still being part of this ongoing aggression on people and people's lives. And specifically for us as the Muslim communities across Canada, the ongoing genocide in Gaza particularly has a compounded meaning. Many of our community members have lost scores of their family members and direct family members, and continue to lose more throughout the so-called ceasefire. We continue to see our holy places such as Al-Aqsa violated, Aqsa Mosque violated, land continuously sabotaged, houses demolished, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank and across occupied Palestine by the IDF directly or through settler terrorist mobs. We also see firsthand here in Canada the impact, along with our colleagues from the pro-Palestinian movement, against our freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and targeting and doxing in workplaces and schools. Therefore, it is important that the Canadian government and makes sure that the Canadian exports must follow ethical and human rights standards. They must comply with international law. And as the world changes, what we say and what we do matters. We can choose to be the force and the voice that restores respect for international law, or we can allow its erosion until it is used against all of us. Finally, I would like to share our collective responsibility here and ask this question: is whose responsibility is it to act? I personally believe that it is upon each one of us. Until this form of complicity ends, we all share the blame, and through each one of us, the government must feel that they have done the right thing, be it complicity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khaled. I'm just gonna, rather than ask questions, go out to the audience right now. It's about 5:15. We're gonna go till about 5:35. We have the room until 6, so please feel free to stay and continue the conversation. I'm going to circulate this sign-up sheet if people want updates over the next couple of weeks. So if you could just put your hand up, and if you could also get to a question and who it's directed to. I'll bring the microphone to you so our guests online, you can do that. Thank you so much. Got one in the back there.
Jenny, how many votes do you need?
Well, we need 50 plus 1 in terms of passage of the bill. At this moment, there are a handful of Liberal MPs who've indicated that they would support the bill. There are some MPs who've said to me that they would not vote against the bill, meaning that I think what they'll do is abstain from voting. I'm quite aggressive in challenging them on that perspective, because ultimately, by abstaining, you're not taking a position that is required. And this will be recorded in Hansard. And for generations to come, in this moment in time, what your vote means, and it will be remembered. So that's sort of where we're at the moment. In terms of timing, so I'll just throw it out there. Right now, the House of Commons schedule changes regularly. At this moment, just as of yesterday, I was advised that my bill will be coming back to the House on February the 27th for a second-hour debate. So we have two-hour debates for it. So this is the second-hour debate, which is the final debate. And then after that, the rule is such that the following Wednesday, if it's on the sitting week of the following Wednesday, is when the vote will take place. So meaning, based on that calendar and the schedule of the House of Commons, the vote will be March 11th. Turns out it's my daughter's birthday. That would be the best present for my entire family.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Hello. Ms. Kwan, this question is primarily directed towards you, and I apologize in advance if it's a tad long-winded. I think it's important to iterate the fact that the struggle does not end with Bill C-233. It must go far beyond that. And the NDP itself is at a crossroads. With new leadership soon to be elected, it has the opportunity to, I hope, reorient itself towards pro-worker policies and economic democracy at home and anti-imperialism abroad. With that, can we trust you and hopefully the rest of the NDP to continue to pursue the right measures, the necessary measures to keep Canada on the right side of history? For example, that could include the prosecution of Canadians that serve in the IDF. It could include the labeling of the IDF as a terror organization. If I may be so bold, it could include the severance of all ties with the settler colonial entity that occupies Palestine. Can we trust you to remain on the right side of history for Canadians and your constituency?
Well, thank you very much for that. I would agree that the issue does not end with Bill C-233, even if it passes, which is why in my earlier comments is the beginning and is really just a tiny, tiny, tiny step in terms of action that is required by Canada. I can tell you, I can speak for myself in terms of my commitment. And I've been in elected office for a long time. Many of you know, at different junctures. And at this moment in time, why did I choose, after waiting 10 years, I've been a member of parliament for 10 years, and gosh, I was desperate to have a draw so that I could table a private member's bill. I'm the immigration critic to get an ombudsperson to ensure fairness and no discrimination in our immigration process, housing, you name it. Like I am just all over those issues. And then I decided that I wanted to do this because the moment calls for it. I will not be able to go home and sleep well thinking that I could have done something and try and drive the issue. So I will say that I will do my level best to carry on the fight, to advance what is right with moral clarity, as the Prime Minister says. And that will be my driving force. I will work hard to bring my colleagues along, and many of them are, by the way. I'm not an expert. I'm not leading this fight. Many of my fellow colleagues feel equally passionate and strong about this issue. So we will do our level best. But the issue here is this. The New Democrats, we have 7 members in the House of Commons. And successively through history, and as Alex and Rachel and others have all said, this is not just now that this is happening. It's happened for decades. And it's alternated between liberal, conservative, and we just sort of sat there and be nowhere. So I would just put this to you, right? In terms of accountability and the pressure that needs to be put on, let's put this on for all elected officials, all members of the House, liberals, conservatives, Green Bloc. They all matter. We all have a vote, and that voice can make a difference. And what will propel it? I really believe it. I come from the grassroots community. I came from nonprofits. Advocacy was my thing. And that got me into electoral politics. I believe in you, in your voice, because that is what's going to drive change. Left for the elected officials to do things on their own, I swear to God, it's never going to happen. It will not happen. So it is you and your voice that matters, and then you get those members of parliament, those elected officials to drive that with you. I believe in it. I think this is like it's like a relay, You pass me the baton, I take it one leg, and so on. And we just have to keep on doing it. And then if we can get this right, humanity has a chance. I believe in it.
Hi, so I just had a question about when Canada initially signed on to the ATT in 2019, correct? There was not the current global geopolitical climate that we're seeing with both the second Trump administration and every other crazy thing that's just happening on Earth at this point. But yet we still made an exception when signing on to a treaty to deliberately exclude our closest and most integrated cultural and economic partner and our only land border as well. And with that integration, you'd expect that enforcing a treaty like this where we track our things would be the simplest with our closest partner, and yet we excluded them. What at that point was the reason for excluding the United States when every single other one of our allies, we were like, no, we'll take accountability for tracking where our weapons go. But the USA, no, leave that one. Why did we leave them out?
I assume you're asking me that question, so I'll sort of just.
You, but anyone hypothetically
Alex?
who can
Okay.
answer.
We will defer to Alex for a minute then.
Thank you.
You can go first, Jenny. I did want to jump in as well because I was very much involved in the campaigning around the ATT at that time, and remember the debate about the U.S. loophole very much.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, I think the first thing I would make sure we're all aware of, it's not that the loophole was created in 2019. The loophole already existed because before we did have some degree of arms control in place even before we joined the arms trade. In fact, that goes back many, many years. And the loophole had always been there. So it's not that when we ratified the arms trade treaty in 2019, we were creating something new. Those of us, there were a number of civil society organizations. I was at Amnesty International in the days, but Project Plowshares was very active on this and other groups as well. And we testified in front of parliamentary committees about how that existing loophole, if it carried forward into this new moment where we actually finally were going to have a meaningful and wide-ranging set of rules governing the arms trade, would gut it of much of its meaning, just repeatedly went nowhere. And the kinds of arguments we got back were some of the things I alluded to a bit in my comments. It's too complicated. It's a lot of what you hear about the auto trade back and forth across the border, that things go back and forth several times across the border. It would be impossible to track if we started doing so. The economic consequences would be enormous. All of which were clearly feeble excuses, because all that was being asked for here, no one was saying to stop the trade. We were just wanting clarity. We were wanting reporting. We were wanting transparency. And yes, in instances where it became clear that a Canadian part was likely going to end up somewhere where it was going to commit serious human rights violations, that should not go ahead. The backdrop to all of this, of course, is just the wider geopolitics of our relationship with the United States. Even at that time, this was not the era of Trump and all of those sensitivities. Canada did not want to do anything that was going to disturb the relationship we had with the United States, especially around anything military or security related.
And if I could just add to that, in the current situation, all of that is valid, and all of that continues to apply today. Because I got a leaked Liberal briefing note document about my bill, it was illuminating to see the language and what is put in there. And in some conversations that I had with some members of the Liberal caucus who are supportive of my bill, so they sort of share some information with me. Some of that conversation went something like this. The bill is too wide and too broad. And so it would completely disable GAC's ability to actually monitor and do the work that they have to do every day, because it would take all of the resources in order to enforce this bill. That was one suggestion, which kind of, in and of itself makes you wonder, what the heck? Are you telling me that the government cannot ensure Canada's processes abide by the Arms Trade Treaty. And so because knowingly that we're violating it, we're just going to turn a blind eye. And if we did pay attention to it, we're incapable of enforcing it. Because that's the message, which I found astounding. The other thing that has been thrown out there is this. They say, oh my God, she means well. But boy, what is she even talking about? Now she's going to talk about like shoelaces. Shoelaces can't be exported. And I just kind of sat there and went like, really? So show me how a weapon can be formulated from a shoelace. Because my bill talks about parts and component, making it clear, right? That is not the whole weaponry, but parts and component needs to be incorporated and have clarity about that in the language, as an example. So this kind of goes on for days with those kinds of excuses. Last but not least, and this was one thing that I actually had a bit of a debate with the alleged drafter on the bill. Because at the end of the day, this is not 100%. I'm not in government. There are a lot of restrictions of what you can and cannot do in a private member's bill. So I had to let some stuff go in order to make it in order and be votable, right? And part of the thing is the end use. You need to track the end use, right? And the only way, truly, to really follow the end use is to have officials in those countries to follow it through, to be sure. But that is not possible because that would require money and private members' bill is not allowed to spend, right? We're not allowed to do that per the rules. So then we sort of came up with the best scenario that we could. And so we're not even asking for end use to be monitored in that way, even though some other countries are doing it, by the way. And so that excuse about not having the resources to do it is just, as Alex says, feeble, because that's what it really is. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of politics engaged here. And I just want to throw in the Bloc for a minute. Because in talking with the Bloc about whether or not they would support the bill, and right now they have actually not said one way or the other. They're sort of like sitting on the fence on this. And I said, like, what is the issue, right? I mean, theoretically, I would thought you guys would be in support of this. So they say, well, we really need to do an analysis on what the implications are for aluminum and steel and aerospace industries. And I said, well, my bill does not include that specifically. So then I said, are you talking about because artillery would be made out of steel, and so therefore it has some implication for steel, and so therefore you cannot support it. It's like me breathing air, and because if we have lacking in oxygen, I should stop breathing. Is that what you're saying to me? Because it kind of sounds like that. So this is sort of where it is at, and where those arguments, as feeble as they are, is using it. And the final thing, I'm sorry I'm taking time, and I want you guys to know this. Some members of the Liberal, members of Parliament from the Liberals have come to me and said, hey, I really want to support this, but are you open for amendments? I said, hey, I'm willing to talk. So what are you thinking? Well, we can't touch the US. And I'm like, what? I said, so my clause in here is no country exemption. And the only country that's exempted is the US. So tell me how I'm supposed to do this thing to close the loophole without talking about the US. Because I don't know. You're smarter than me, but tell me how. But this is sort of the conversation of where it is at.
It's literally, we're just getting in compliance with the treaty. We are just agreeing to do what we've signed on in principle to do, but are not actually doing.
It's words, not action, right?
We've got time for two more
Sorry.
questions. I'm going to let each of the panelists have 1 minute to close. We have one question up there and one right here.
Hi, this question is for Jenny. Firstly, congratulations on all the amazing momentum you're building. It's very needed. And I also spoke to MP Wade Grant. He had a positive response to this, and I hope we can continue to build this momentum. As much as this movement is increasing in size, I think the audience it is reaching is still people who are very engaged with social justice and human rights issues already, and it needs to break a bit more into the mainstream so normal people are speaking up more. And making a parallel to Zoran Mamdani's campaign where he had his creative team sit down with creators in New York to make political content, work with content creators, social justice organizations in order to reach out to their audiences and like do some sort of actions. Would you also have some guidelines or tips, or be willing to sit down with organizations like these so that we can make more content and market it in a way that gets broader audiences into this as well, apart from like panels and sit down in-depth discussions like this, but perhaps an Instagram account from you that is purely dedicated to this, and other people, when they post about it, collaborate with it, and we can reach out together, blah blah.
Short answer is yes.
Okay, sure, I can reach out about this later as well. Awesome.
Okay, we have one question here, and I'm going to give 1 minute to each of the panelists to close.
Could you raise your hand again?
So Jenny and Am both know who my MP is. The moral argument is not working. The international law argument is not working. They don't respect international law. You guys know this. So let's go with the pragmatic argument. What can we offer them or the Liberal Party that would make them go, okay, maybe we'll support the bill in exchange for that? And what if the bill doesn't pass? What's plan B? What are the next steps?
The pragmatic approach. Well, I'll tell you this. So when budget 2025 was up, the government needed New Democrat votes. My exchange was this bill. I'll tell you right now. Right? I mean, there were a lot of things about the budget that it breaks my heart about. But I said, vote for my bill, you'll get my vote.
You already betrayed Elizabeth
And
so.
yeah. So so pragmatic. The other piece, I guess, about being pragmatic for elected officials is about votes, right? Your vote in the ballot matter to them, so your voice matter to them, and this is why I think galvanizing that and pushing it forward. Now, I'm told many Liberals want to vote for this bill, but they're afraid to. They're afraid to because the center, when I say the center, will be the leadership of the Liberal Party, has said no, right? And that's why I got this leaked document. But we have to let them know that their seats is not secure because people will vote based on this. This is what we got to do. And then to the gentleman's point, reaching beyond the room is absolutely critical, and we have to do everything we can.
I'm going to just ask each of you to spend 1 minute to close off, and I wonder, Alex, if you could start.
I guess I would just reiterate what I think has come through very powerfully from everyone's presentations this evening, and that is, this is such a moment. This loophole has been a glaring stain, not only on Canada's arms control regime, but on the notion that we are a country that stands for something when it comes to international law. And this isn't going to come around again, anytime soon. We tried to have this fight at the time when Canada was ratifying the treaty and got nowhere. We are so much further down the road in having this phenomenal piece of legislation from you, Jenny, on the table, so that there's actually something to seize onto. And we just have to, I get the last question about, where's the pragmatic and practical side of this? And yes, we need to think that. And I agree that I think the pragmatic practical side is we need to make it clear to all MPs that this matters to Canadians. Whether or not it's the fact that it matters because of international legal obligations or it matters because of humanitarianism, it matters. And that therefore they really do need to line up behind it. So I welcome all the work that lies ahead.
Thanks so much, Alex. Rachel.
Yeah, I'll jump on that last point about pragmatism as well. I mean, obviously, I come to this conversation not as a legislator, but as an activist and as an organizer of grassroots activists. And I mean, well, we've been talking. When I think about this, well, first of all, let me just say the Arms Embargo Now campaign doesn't start or end with this bill. We are very happy to take on this aspect of this campaign at this moment because, like Alex said, I think bills like this don't come around very often. It is significant. But if anyone thinks that the many, many tens of thousands of people who have been showing up on the streets of cities across Canada every single week for 2 years to end a genocide are going to stop because of the results of this bill, they haven't been paying attention. The fight will continue. We will keep blockading the arms factories. We will keep occupying Parliament. We will keep having our kite festivals and our church services. That will all continue. Regardless. That said, from a pragmatic perspective, I have not been thinking about this private members bill and the process of organizing behind it as like a light switch, like either it passes or it doesn't. And I think if we look, again, not a parliamentary expert by the long stretch, but looking at past private members bills where there has been significant numbers of votes for them, even if it has not been enough to pass the bill, but if the party in power has been split on it, if there's been many votes for it, it shows that there's a real need to change Canadian law. And sometimes what that has historically looked like is the party in power, even if that private members bill didn't pass, incorporating some of it into legislation that they bring forward and pass. So I don't think we should think about it as either it's a win or a fail, it passes or it doesn't. I think from an organizer perspective, if we can split the Liberal vote, if we can get lots of Liberal MPs especially to vote for it, that can create an imperative in Parliament for them to bring some of these changes forward under Liberal Party legislation. And we have moved at least 3 Liberal MPs in just the last 5 days, where they have originally were saying, I'm not going to vote for this bill, and now they're saying, I'm going to vote at second reading. I think it needs some changes, but I'm going to vote for it at second reading to bring it to committee. So, and none of those happened. I couldn't see the person in the room who was asking the question, but I don't think it happened for the reasons that you were saying. It's been very hard to push your MP. I don't think it was necessarily that they grew a heart. That's not exactly what you said, but suddenly gained a moral perspective on the situation. I think it happened because those ridings had well-organized constituents who held phones apps where they made hundreds of calls to the MP and said, actually, this is really important to us. They postered the whole neighborhood and all the main streets with posters that said, this MP needs to pick a side. We've got phone scripts, we've got those posters, we've got all those tools on the website. It doesn't actually take 100 people rallying outside the office. It takes 4 well-organized people taking some steps to exert some pressure on their MP. And I will say there are many, many, many newly elected Liberal MPs across the country who are not very secure in their seats. They know they got in on a wave just a few months ago, and they are subject to a lot of pressure to do the right thing here, I think. So that would be my kind of pragmatic thinking about this bill.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Khaled.
Thanks, Sam. So I'll follow what Rachel and Alex mentioned, and basically on the on the Liberal Party side, we're as noted by the Prime Minister, these are really changing times, and basically the way the party and the government acts and the leadership acts, the way it will solidify its support and it's actually it will give it strength. The previous government, the Trudeau government, towards the end, part of the reason it fell was its moral inconsistency on issues such as Gaza and complicity, and similarly their attempt to flip-flop and political gesturing across communities did not take them anywhere. So this government cannot repeat the same playbook that happened with the Trudeau government, and the only path forward, particularly on issues that will show moral clarity, the Prime Minister is invoking moral clarity, values, and principles in his leadership and his motion and his movement forward. So for you to get any sort of credibility, your actions, your legislation, your positions from legislation such as Bill C-233 should be consistent and should invite people to support you on that premise. So it makes perfect sense to me and to many communities around Canada that this is where the Liberal Party should stand. This is where they should, at any expense, and when any polls will come through, as it did as it relates to Gaza before, the general public is aware of where the government should be on issues of principle. And this will solidify support. This will give him the right move and the right message from Canadians to stand up to the bully, to stand up in their confrontation moving forward. But if he goes otherwise, he will not get that support, and any motion and any movement that will be taken will be the weaker movement. And this litmus test that Jenny referred to is one of the first few tests that they should be truthful to. And I encourage everybody to send this specific message to the government. It is important to make the right decision now, the right movement now, at the party level, at the government level, and at the individual level as MP. As MP Kwan said, history will be watching and Canadians will note. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khaled. Next, I'm going to ask Jenny for some closing remarks, and then Adel will close the event on behalf of CCMS with some closing remarks. Jenny.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you, to the Arms Embargo Now Coalition for your incredible work, Alex for your years and decades of investing in humanity, in human rights, in that fight. You know, to Khaled, the work that you're doing, Adel, SFU, you know, the program, everybody here. I only just a person who happens to have a platform in this moment in time. And I've always looked at how I do politics should be to use my platform to amplify the voice of the community. And in this moment, this is so critical to me because it literally is life and death, right? It is about lives and it's about people and it is real what's going on. And we can do something about it. And so I'm only just a tiny, tiny, tiny speck in the spectrum of the work that you've all been doing for so very long. And no matter what happens with this bill, whether it passes or it doesn't, the fight doesn't end here. You better believe that the fight will not end here. We cannot allow it, and I know you won't allow it. And so with that being said, we have a moment to pressure the people who are sitting on the fence, who choose to be ignorant, who choose to ignore, who choose not to see, to make them see. Even if they don't have the courage to vote for the bill, make them see, because they have to go home and think about this, and think about it every single night. Because if we succeed in doing that, we have a hope further down the road of making wider change, desperately needed change. And so I know it sounds cliche, but I believe in the heart. We all have it. I know it's there. Sometimes it's hard to reach, sometimes it's hard to find, but we have to find it. Because, you know, as a elder that I've learned from the Indigenous community, have taught me so many years ago when I first entered into electoral politics. And he said, we're all connected. We're all connected. Humanity, the human race, we're all connected one way or another. So I'm not a religious person, but I believe it. I feel it. So find that heart. Help me find that heart. Because all those members of parliament, they have it. Just make them realize that they have it.
And once again, thank you so much to Adel and the Center for Comparative Muslim Studies. Without public-facing institutions at the university in a time of budget cuts, it becomes very difficult to gather and have important conversations. As a former employee of the university, we understand how limiting these spaces are. So thank you so much, Adel. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. First, can we start with thanking Am for making this day possible? Thank you, Am, for your poise, your focus, your desire to bring us all together in recognizing the weight of the moment. Thank you, Jenny, for the incredible and extraordinary effort and the extent to which you are prepared to put so much on the line for this, to make this the issue at this particular juncture in your career is a testament to how we should be in our respective lives. So deeply humbling, and it's a real delight to have you with us and to have you guide this pathway. Rachel, honestly, this is, I think, the second or third time that we've been on a panel together, or at least I might have been observing one or the other. But the work that you do day in and day out, and all of your allies and comrades in this struggle, it's immensely remarkable. And I just wanted to express my deepest and most heartfelt gratitude on behalf of everyone here, and we wish you were with us in person. So thank you, Rachel. Khaled, we've known each other for some time. You're an indefatigable, tireless advocate for human rights, and to see you be able to center this issue in the work that you're doing now is extraordinary. What you're doing for the Muslim community generally, but also centering the humanity of Muslims today and trying to preserve human life with your support for this bill, it's also something that is not lost on any of us. So thank you, Khaled, for this work. And Alex, what can I say? A lifetime of standing up for what's right without any equivocation, without any hesitation, with a very clear path, clear-minded, clear-sighted approach. You bring the weight of both history and now your remarkable title, very well deserved. It adds both gravitas and purpose to C-233, and we need whatever privilege, power, or posture one might have. So thank you for bringing that weight to this particular movement, and of course. There's so many unsung heroes in our midst today. Thank you all for the remarkable work that you do day in and day out to try and push this through. I'm just going to say one small point here in regards to where we're going next, and I'm distilling this from everything that's been said thus far. We have to be absolutely clear to all of our elected officials that they have one responsibility and one responsibility alone, which is to represent us. The day that they begin to fail us in this regard, in the same way that we mobilize for them, we will mobilize against them. It is as simple as that. Whether they want to think about it morally or think about it pragmatically, we will mobilize against them. And that is a fundamental right that we possess. Many of us come from places where we have lost those rights. And so we are here and we will fight to the finish to make sure that our convictions, our aspirations, our dreams, our hopes for a better humanity continue to live on in the work that they do, even when they're not paying attention. And then finally, I also want to say that the No Loopholes connection is part and parcel of a larger movement, a movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, not just against Israel, but anyone who commits crimes against humanity on an international level. So in the same way that we are pushing for this, we are also pushing against any prohibition of our right to stand up for what's right. So let's remind ourselves of that and also recognize that we have momentum. We do have momentum, unquestionably. The conversation right now is about how to change our current status quo, and we are increasingly realizing how indistinguishable the other two parties are, especially in their actions and motives and behavior. Today, as we look at, gentlemen here mentioned Zohran Mamdani and others have mentioned him too, it is a sign of the times. Things are changing and we have momentum, and we will bring this momentum to the streets, in front of their offices, in their mailboxes, on their phones, and everywhere else. So please, take this energy, make it happen every single day. Pay attention to those dates that Jenny mentioned, and continue to circulate and mobilize as best you can, because this is a critical juncture. It is not the last juncture, but it is our first juncture in this particular moment in time. Thank you.